Hey folks, welcome to your last paper assignment for political philosophy. A couple of important points. Your due date for the topic selection for your paper is November the 6th. That gives you about 2 weeks as of today. The paper is due 11/25. That's November the 25th. That gives you just about a month to write this. So you've got a due date coming up in 2 weeks to pick your assignment, and then you have the paper due a few weeks after that. So our governing quote for this particular assignment is from Plato's Republic. Shall we then permit our children without scruple to hear any stories composed by any authors whatever? If you remember at the very beginning of this course, we talked about Socrates and the role of attacking tradition and finding a principled rational basis for our beliefs as opposed to just relying on tradition. Now, in an attempt to question even that assumption, we looked at people like Burke, who questioned the idea that we should be questioning tradition. The problem is that philosophy sort of defines itself as willing to question all sorts of assumptions. Political philosophy, in its quest, has developed a kind of tradition of its own. And the worry here with tradition is that something becomes true and it becomes dogma and develops a kind of orthodoxy of its own. So the idea is that people just memorize what great thinkers think instead of coming to those conclusions organically and thinking for themselves. So the goal of this paper is to help you kind of get outside of the tradition of political philosophy. In other words, you're helping this class avoid the fate of becoming a poison, right, that would be worthy of being burned, as we've understood that phrase from Ta-Nehisi Coates and Nas. So what I want you to do for this particular assignment is to find something that you feel should have been included in the course, that if you were running the course, you would have definitely put this in there. And that way, this course doesn't just become something that's a rock rotating in another galaxy in a sky that you would never cross. Instead, it will touch home to how you think and how you act. So the goal of this assignment is for you to find these things for yourself. However, I understand it may be difficult to find certain political works or works of political philosophy. And so I've given you a list right down here. Now, these are things that I've wanted to teach, or I have taught in the past, or I've considered teaching. And so if you find something down here, if you're not sure where to start, this particular list is a good place to start. There are thinkers from all across the spectrum here, from conservative to postmodern to illiberal to liberal to you name it, right? And so the goal here is that you find something that you think is important or interesting or relevant to your life. Now, there are a couple of rules. So try to find your own. If you can't, that's okay. Check out something from the list, start Googling those things or researching them on your own. If possible, things that are in the public domain are very good because this permits me to use the entire text. If it's not in the public domain, you'll need to get a copy of it. You can check the LBCC library. If not, I don't request that you spend any money for this particular assignment. If you really want to, you're welcome to, but don't feel like you need to buy something because this is the only thing that you can find. A video, a song, or a painting will not be sufficient for this assignment. There are lots of great political works that you can find online in video format. You can find lots of paintings that are political paintings, songs that are political songs, right? But it needs to be something that sort of has more text. Those other forms of media just won't be sufficient for this particular assignment. Okay, so first thing you do, find your work, and you need to do that by Wednesday, November the 6th. And what you'll do is you'll turn in your topic right here. This says the 7th, but it's actually the 6th. I haven't changed that yet. So that's the first thing that you do. So today is the 28th. You've got a couple weeks, but don't let it sneak up on you. Step 2, summarize the work. Okay, so you present what it is substantively, what concepts what rules, what applications, what content is in there that's important to know. Now, you'll find that it can be difficult to summarize work. In some cases, it might be just breaking it down into 4 or 5 bullet points. In other cases, you might be able to make a mnemonic, right? Each element of this work spells out happy, right? Happy, or something like that. The goal here is to take the work and to break it into smaller bites. It's very difficult for people to learn all at once, just like it's very difficult to eat a steak in one bite. You need to break it into smaller bites for people. Sometimes this means contrasting something with something that it is not. Sometimes it means contrasting something with another thinker. So, for instance, when we talked about Edmund Burke, we talked about Thomas Paine. When we talk about Marx, we'll talk about Hegel. That's because in some senses they're complementary, in some senses they're reacting to one another, and sometimes that interchange is really important. Step 3. The next thing you need to do is explain how the work is related to the course. So if you find a great work, let's say it's a speech, but it's about the meaning of life, that's not going to be particularly relevant to a course on political philosophy. You need a hook that relates to a theme within the course. What is the relation of the individual to the state? What's the best form of government? What's the best distribution of resources in society? What's the best form of rule? Does democracy have any criticisms, like Plato says in Book 8? Does it have to do with environmental philosophy, right? There are lots and lots of topics that exist within political philosophy. Make sure that the work you select attaches in an important way to one of those themes. All right, step 4, create some kind of class activity that will integrate the material. It might mean that you have students break up and debate a point. It might mean that students have to fill in the blanks or something like that. Students might have to learn a concept and then apply it in a totally different context, right? Something that will let students do something that will help them understand the material, help them apply the material, help them interact with it. Maybe they disagree with it, something along those lines. Then your last step is to write it up. Now, when you're writing this paper, you don't need to write it in the traditional sense that you sort of just have big blocks of text and it's a paper. What I want you to do is use these titles and insert them into your paper. So topic and title of work, right? It's effectively 4 short answer questions in this way, but it will be 4 short answer questions that will total around 4 to 5 pages. So 1, right? Topic and title of the work. So what's the title of the work? Who wrote it? That sort of thing. Number 2, give me a summary of the work. Tell me about the history. Tell me about what it's saying. Number 3, how does this relate to the course? Maybe it relates to something we've already read. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe it's something about workers' rights or the free market that we haven't discussed yet. And then lastly, give me a class activity related to the work. Don't worry too much about 4, but try to come up with something for it, right? Students will debate something. Students will take a quiz. You can always just write up a short quiz on it. That students would have to complete before they come to class or at the conclusion of class. And that's the bulk of the paper. If you have any questions or concerns, particularly about your topic, talk to me before Wednesday, November the 6th. That's when the first part of this paper will. One last super important thing that I forgot to mention, how will your paper be graded? There'll be 4 categories for your grading. The first is organization. Did you conform to these little subtitles? It is very difficult if you write the paper and you don't conform to that format, because then it's less likely that you're going to get through everything that you need to in order to complete the paper. So I urge you to use those titles throughout your paper. So 1, topic and title of work. 2, summary of the work, right? Do those sorts of things so that you hit all the points and you get all the points. So organization is important. Mechanics, that's about 25% of the grade. Mechanics is really important. Are you capitalizing your proper nouns? Are you capitalizing I? Be careful not to use contractions. They're just not appropriate for a formal paper submission. Things like that. Good tips for that. I would read your paper out loud. If a sentence doesn't make sense, it's probably got something wrong with it. Then I would print it out and read each sentence of the paper backwards. And as you do that, you will not be interrupted by the flow. You'll see every mistake. Also, when you read it in print, it's a little different than reading it on the screen. It's harder to catch errors on the screen. Style, 25%. Is the style appropriate for the level of paper? So the goal here is that you write clearly, not that you write with very fancy words. I would much rather read a sentence that said something like, the dog ate the building, than, the canine was ferociously, ravenously hungry and devoured the edifice with all of its might, or something like that. I mean, it's better to be clear in the concepts that you're expressing than to sound fancy. Anyone can sound fancy. It's more important that you're clear. And lastly, substance. Have you, in fact, given me something of substance? Have you really summarized the work? So if you are looking at something like Aquinas and the Summa, because you want to talk about natural law or something like that, have you done a good enough job of explaining what natural law is, what motivates the theory, what misconceptions it might have, that sort of thing, as opposed to just trying to summarize in very general and unmeaningful ways what's going on? Did you really dig in and give me something of substance, something that's worthwhile? By the way, if you're having a tough time relating the work to the course, that section of the paper is probably the one that is in the most need of help. Okay, that's it. As usual, if you have any questions or concerns, please come to me. It is really my pleasure to help you on this. Your work in this assignment helps future students. It's not that I sort of gave this assignment, I thought, gosh, maybe they're going to think I'm being lazy. It's not that. It's that you have a perspective. Your experiences, your life, your mind, all of these things serve to inform me as your instructor. And my goal is that you get something out of this course and future students get something out of this course. And so it helps me to learn what engages you and what will help future students learn, and keep this process an organic one rather than just an assembly line where people come into the class, I throw up the knowledge, and then they spit it back at me. Okay, thanks a ton, and I look forward to your submissions. Remember, get your paper topic in by the 6th.